The time is around 2 o'clock, and it's April 30th, Saturday. How y'all doing? This is the show where we serve the underserved and look into the overlooked. And I'll be joined today by Tyler Vela, smart guy if I ever saw a smart guy. He's going to be giving us an update on what's happening with the Open Theist crowd. You know, that's the folks who affirm what they're now calling dynamic omniscience. You're going to learn all about that and some more stuff here in a second here, Street Apologists Live. Be sure to subscribe to this channel. Hit that bell, notifications, you know how to do. Be sure to like this video, please. Share this link. We're going to talk for about an hour on this live stream today. Let's go. What's up, Brother Tyler? How you doing today, man? Thanks for joining me, homie.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
So, you're a podcaster.
Yeah, podcast, YouTube, blog.
Tell people...
Triple threat. I'm a white male Christian too, so you know.
Yeah, I saw some of your like blogs on Amazon, actually.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, like on your author page, you know, because you have a book where you evaluate certain form of atheism. On your author page, you also have the blogs come up there, blog posts, a certain amount. Yeah. I don't know how up to date they were, but yeah, you do. And well, tell people how to find you online with the podcast. You know, you always do good stuff. I know you're finishing up some stuff in the Book of Judges you've been doing. Tell people about Judges and about some of the blogs if you could.
Yeah, so you can find me freethinkerpodcast.blogspot.com. It's a terrible webpage, but it's old and I'm not tech savvy like some of y'all, you know, younger generation, younger folks. So it is what it is. But you can find the podcast, the Freethinker Podcast, on pretty much, you know, the Apple Podcast, anywhere you can find it, or the blog, or find Freethinker on YouTube. Or join the group page on Facebook and join the discussion there. And like to talk about things that have to do with apologetics, systematic theology, reform theology, and recently wrapping up a series going through kind of a broad overview about how to do a historical grammatical hermeneutic and how to read through the Book of Judges within its historical context. So just about one more episode on that. So look forward to that. And then I also co-host I just finished an episode just before this. I co-host a YouTube channel called Sage Stage, which is dedicated to, you know, irenic conversations among Christian brothers of different theological persuasions. So nice.
And you're a guy that when I have a question, you're one of the folks I try to get a hold of and call. And I guess if you're stuck in LA traffic, then you usually have time to talk.
Yep.
That's kind of how that works.
That's my commute. I spend about 3 hours a day in the car to and from. So, yeah.
Oh my goodness. That's why people are, well, anyways. All right. Well, I'm glad to have you on today. And we're going to be discussing open theism. It's an apologetics issue. Obviously, it's a theological issue. It's a biblical issue. It's a Christian issue. What is open theism? We've done some shows on it before, but what's your working definition?
Yeah, open theism is effectively the concept that the future is not settled even for God. So God does not have knowledge of the future because the future is not yet determined yet. So he learns what's happening as it's happening, just like the rest of us.
All right. Sorry, everyone. My dog is, I don't know what has gotten into her, but jumping up here a lot more than usual.
She's very, very, very eager to take a bite out of open theism herself. So.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Well played.
Trained her well.
Yeah, exactly. So, like I said, we've covered it a few times, and one of the open theist guys, who's the guy who likes to drink a lot when he does a show?
I don't know.
I forgot. I think it's Chris something, but he's always like drinking.
Chris Fisher?
I think that's him. Yeah.
Yeah, Chris Fish, yeah. We'll talk about him.
He's usually drinking when he talks, or a lot of times, right?
I don't know. Yeah.
Anyway,
sure.
So he did a review of it and all of that, and some stuff in the comments in there. So I've talked about, I did some book reviews of books that help people have resources about how to properly deal with it before. But you've put out some great stuff yourself and some great debates you've done. And so you're really current on the current lay of the land. And that's what I really want people to see is the current state of open theism. Because when I first heard about it, as far as really an issue, it was guys like I believe John Sanders, and some of the guys of that generation. Well, there's like a whole new crop of internet guys running around, and you're one of the people who's dealing with them a lot with some of the debates and stuff. So how has it metamorphosized, transformed currently to where we see versions of open theism today?
Yeah, so like most things, the online version is worse than the academic version. Right. So if you're reading Sanders or Hasker or Rhoda or some of the other more academic open theists, they're not going to go to the excesses and kind of exotic views of your Chris Fishers and Will Duffy and Warren McGrews and to a lesser extent Drew. I can't remember his name. One of the Provisionist perspective guys. They're going to try to ground themselves a little bit more in the philosophical aspect. They don't really venture into the biblical components of it. What the online guys are doing is trying to, I think try to synthesize that a little bit more with a biblical theological approach. They just do it extremely poorly, and they're somewhat. I think their fundamental commitment to a very, very strong view of libertarian freedom is kind of the controlling condition for all of the other views that kind of filter everything else. And so they arrive at some rather strange views, to say the least.
How many debates have you done with open theists online?
I've done a lot of text debates. I've done 2 formal debates. So I formally debated Will Duffy on the gospel truth, and then I debated Ward McGrew on Chris Featherstone's channel. I forget the name of the channel.
Dr. Chris Featherstone.
Yep.
But he had Vision or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. So I've done those 2 formal debates. But I've had lots and lots of interactions and conversations and text discussions with Chris Fisher and Drew and some of the other kind of online open theists. So,
what would you say you've learned from those interactions?
I'll try to stick with something positive. The importance of I think the importance of grounding yourself in historic Orthodox Christianity, and the testimony of the Church Universal is led by the Holy Spirit, a good, robust hermeneutical method. You kind of, the way that I think about it is those are the type of I'm a Protestant. I hold the sola scriptura. Sola scriptura is my ultimate grounding authority. But by God's providence, He has given us some boundaries that are really helpful. I think of it like bowling. When you go bowling, you can throw up the bumpers. And good hermeneutics is on one side, and kind of the Orthodox tradition of the church is on the other side, right? They're not necessarily your controlling authorities, but God has given those things to look back and keep us from just completely going off into the gutter. This movement at Open Theism, I think, has just jumped the rails and is like five lanes down the alley and just causing havoc. So
yeah, I remember I caught in your debate with McGrew. He said classical theism, which is sometimes confused with biblical theism.
Yeah.
So explain to the people what he's trying to say by that.
Yeah. So most open theists are what's called non-classical theists. Mm-hmm. Non-classical theists. So classical theism is historically is the historic Orthodox view. It's really well defined in Aquinas and going forward. But that's the view that God is, all the omni attributes, but also that he is immutable, right? He's unchanging in his nature. He's aseity, or he has aseity, right? He is non-contingent in any way upon anything else outside of himself. That he is simple, that he's not composed of any type of parts, and that includes things like accidental properties, and that he is impassible, right? So he's not moved to emotion. He's timeless, he's spaceless, he's immaterial, right? These are all, whenever you hear God described that way, that's classical theism. The non-classical theist comes along, and typically, because they reject simplicity, they also start rejecting impassibility, they start rejecting aseity, they start rejecting immutability. Once you start rejecting immutability, it just entails then you reject timelessness, because there is kind of this sequential change that they view. So they view that as kind of a God type of primordial time type of thing, or higher order time, higher register time. And so you actually end up having this vision of God, this understanding of God that is entirely different. It's a different concept of God than what we as historically Orthodox Christians would affirm. And they don't like this. But I have started just saying, really, your concept is just kind of this mega Zeus concept, right? It's this very, very powerful, very, very good, very loving. Take Zeus, make him omnipotent, and make him not capricious, and make him wholly wise, right?
Yeah.
And that's their concept of God. But he's finite, he's changeable, he's movable, he's reactionary, he learns, it's just a mega Zeus concept.
Yeah, it's like a Zeus 2.0.
Yeah.
So see, I have this little book out, Street Level Apologetics, and I actually have a section because I'm talking about presuppositionalism, and I have this little section called the Uniqueness of God. Yeah. Absolute, acting, aseity, eternal, immutable, judging, loving, self-contained, self-existent, self-sufficient, and some other things. Seems like some of the items on that little list they would disagree with.
They would disagree with almost every of what we historically call the incommunicable attributes of God, the things that are solely true of God, and are not true of humanity. So that just is God is the only ase being. God is the only being that has no contingency. God is the only simple being. He's the only one that's not composed of any type of parts or distinctions. God is immutable. He's the only being that's unchanging. Right. So you have. God is the only one that has these incommunicable attributes. Some of the other incommunicable attributes, they will redefine, right? So they're going to say, well, we affirm omniscience. It's just dynamic omniscience. God knows everything that there is to know, but the future just isn't the type of thing that he can know. Right, because it
doesn't exist. It doesn't exist yet.
It doesn't exist yet, and in order for us to have free will choices, we have to have these real. It has to be really metaphysically possible for me to choose one way or the other. And since in order for me to choose, it can't be determined in advance. The future is really open. God can't know what I'm going to choose because it's not a real choice yet. And if he knew what I'd choose, then that means that's fixed what I'm going to choose, and therefore I'm not free. Right? In one sense, open theists are the most consistent libertarian free will advocates. Right? This just is a normal. They just lean into the objection that a lot of us give to libertarians and say, well, if you're a libertarian, then you've completely removed the ground for God's knowledge. You should be an open theist. An open theist is going to just agree with that assessment. They're just going to say, well, yes, then open theism is true. Whereas most libertarians are going to see that conclusion is a bridge too far.
They would balk at that. However, and I'm not trying to throw shade. I'm not into like sly talk and slick talk like that, like the way some people do it on the internet with sub disses and all. I don't know. I mean, I guess every now and then maybe I get into that, but I try not to be that way. My point is, I mean, I've seen Leighton Flowers have open theists. Is he platforming them? Yeah. It looks like. But so soteriology 101, I thought he would kind of affirm like a classic Wesleyan Arminian soteriology, but I'm getting a little confused by the platforming of the open theists.
Yeah, he's a provisionist. He's not an Arminian. So this is a common misunderstanding.
I know, I hear them say that, but you find the difference valid?
Yep.
Okay.
It's very valid. And it's meaningful because there's a reason why Arminians are not semi-Pelagian, but Provisionists are, right? Because Arminians are semi-Pelagians. Arminians affirm, they actually affirm total depravity, even if they don't affirm a full or total inability. And so the Arminians are going to historically say it does take prevenient grace. It takes a special act of the Holy Spirit upon the nature of man to enable faith, to allow for faith, to make faith possible. The Provisionist is a semi-Pelagian, and specifically because they say, well, no, the initium fide, the initial step of faith, doesn't require this supernatural act of God upon the unbeliever. They deny that. That just is what makes them semi-Pelagian, where Arminians aren't. So Provisionism is its own thing. It's its own view. It just is kind of rehashed.
But Wesley did affirm provisional grace.
Wesley affirmed prevenient grace.
Oh, so wait, yeah. So, wow. Okay, so, see, I could see someone making that mistake of prevenient versus provisional. And so I'm still putting all this together. Sometimes when you don't study something a while and you get back in, this is why I had you on.
Yeah.
Okay, so, wow, okay. Because a lot of times I had seen, it's easy to mistake that someone is like not wanting to be called a Wesleyan or Arminian and be called like someone who affirms prevenient grace. But if they're saying provisionist, then they're not saying prevenient grace. So prevenient grace and provisionist grace, they're defining those things differently. How would you define prevenient versus provisionist?
So prevenient grace is grace that goes before. That's what prevenience is, right? So it's grace that goes before. It's a special act of grace by the Holy Spirit upon the unbeliever. So, if you're a historic Arminian, that grace is that God is going to come and illuminate you to the truth of the gospel. Is going to illuminate you to your sin, convict you of your sin. If you're a Wesleyan, it's going to be a kind of removal of the bondage. If you're a Catholic, it's going to be the removal of the stain of original sin at baptism. If you're kind of an evangelical Arminian, it's going to be this general fog of illumination and the conviction of sin across all humanity. If you're a provisionist, you deny prevenient grace. There's no special work of the Holy Spirit upon the unbeliever to change any part of their nature to make faith possible. Faith is possible for the unbeliever in virtue of them being a human. Right, the initial step of faith, nothing special has to happen for you to have your first step of faith on provisionism. Provisionism says that the provision was the death of Christ, that salvation was provided for all, or the mechanism or the means for salvation was provided for all humanity. That's where he made provision for salvation. I
did not fully, as you can tell, sometimes I play partially dumb for the audience. So don't get that wrong. I'm serious. I'm not joking. Other times it's a mixture. So today's a mixture. Like, I did not fully understand some of the levels of distinctions and some of what you're saying they were actually affirming. And I feel like you've explained it more clearly than any of the Open Theists I've heard, or Provisionists as well.
Yeah, so you could be
talking about.
You could be a Provisionist
and not be an Open Theist. But is every Open Theist a Provisionist?
No, not every. No, most of the ones that you're going to run into online are. They're going to be some manner of Provisionists, because they are going to hold this radical view of libertarian freedom, and so they're going to lean into the idea that, well, to be free, I can't be constrained, and so therefore,
every time I hear about this, Tyler, I don't want to think this because, some Open Theists are nice guys, but every time I hear about this, man, it's like worse than I thought it was, man.
Yeah, every time I dig into Open Theism, it's terrible. And this is where, I've flat out said, Open Theism to me is heresy. It denies the classical attributes of God. It's just a different concept of God.
What about Provisionism?
Provisionism. Well, I don't know if I want to rock that boat right now.
Provisionism. You can give your opinion. I mean, I'm just trying.
Yeah.
I'm trying to sort this out. So I'm letting you give your opinion here, because these are waters you tread. Whenever we talk on the phone, you tell me all this stuff about stuff going on, and I'm like, I didn't realize all that was happening within the open theist world and whatnot, and the places that it connects on. That's why I wanted to have you on. That's why the title, the screenshot is, or the cover image is Open Theism Today. Right. So what about provisionism in your view? Is there a charitable version of provisionism that you think is, if there's a spectrum that's like closer to the prevenient people?
There's a spectrum that's closer than farther, so part of this goes into how you understand heresy, right? So I think someone that can affirm heresy and yet be a Christian, they're saved. They're saved as
so they can have damnable heresy and non-damnable heresy. Is that the distinction you're talking about?
Yeah. So it's heresy, but I don't necessarily think that it means that the person is unsaved. I think that if I was still a ruling elder at a church, we may bar the table from someone. You might still go under church discipline. It's still heresy, but we're not going to excommunicate you as an unbeliever. Open theism, I think, is just flat out heresy. I wouldn't consider an open theist a brother. I've also found, along with open theism, because of the way that they view God, it really messes also with their view of the Trinity. And their view of the hypostatic union.
Oh boy!
Right, because they want to say, well, God is time bound, right? And they try to prove that God can change by saying, look, the hypostatic union shows that God can change, because God took on a human nature. Jesus was sans human nature, and then he took on a human nature, and so that shows that God can change.
Do you almost get into some quasi-modalism there?
Yeah, so I point out
quasi-modalism.
Quasi-modal, nice.
Three different modes.
so I point out that the hypostatic union historically is that the natures don't impact each other, right? So they are two natures that are kept in this hypostasis, and they don't alter the other nature.
I mean, that's creedal.
Right?
And I'm not now. Someone's going to say, "Oh, is Vocab a crypto Catholic?" I do believe the creeds are a guide, like these
They're
guides,
rails.
just like Tyler said, not some infallible thing. But it's like when you're messing around with that, I just think you should do it. You should take it into consideration. It should be very serious if you're kind of messing around with these guardrails of. Again, I'm doing this because it's a book, so it's shameless plug. In the back of this book, Tyler. In the back of my new little book, I know you're not here to talk about my book, so I'm not going to do it long, but I have appendices, and I include in the back, and a street-level apologetics book, I did this on purpose, the Apostles' Creed, the Nicene Creed, the Chalcedon Creed, and the Athanasian Creed, as well as the New Hampshire Confession of Faith. So, those matter. What you're saying, you're starting to mess around with that. So, my goodness, I think this is helpful for the audience. That's why I told you guys, everybody, Tyler's one of the guys that I call when I have a question. He's been one of the guys. I used to call Jeff Cran a lot when I had questions about Judaism, Hebrew. Brothers went to be with the Lord. I still miss him every day. But Tyler is still here. Whenever he's stuck in traffic, I give him a call, and I appreciate that. So this is helpful. In your debate with McGrew, I just felt like he was trying to redefine everything to make it more palatable. And I understand if you think the position is biblical, we can all be off or deceived or whatever the case is. But I just felt, I don't know how to say it. There's almost a sense of uncomfortability. Like, I know enough about these issues. Why are you redefining these things? Oh, Tyler and I both affirm omniscience. His is just not dynamic like mine is.
Yeah, and this is big. So he's going to want to fall on when we define omnipotence, for example. We say God can do any logically possible thing, right? God can't make a square circle. That's fine with it. They're going to say, well, the same thing happens with omniscience, right? God can't know unknowable things.
Yeah.
Which I'm going to agree with. God can't know what a square circle is. He can know that you can't have a square circle, but God can't know what a square circle is.
So a square circle, everybody, by definition, is an unknowable thing in a sense of because it cannot exist. So
because
God
it's incoherent. It's not a thing. Yeah. There's no concept
to it. It's just two words put together.
Yeah. God can't know an instantiation of a married bachelor.
Yeah.
Right? So I'm fine with that. So he's going to say, okay, but the future is like that. So we're going to say God can know all possible things.
Mary
but he can't know
Bachelors
the future.
are trying to put the future under that category of unknowable things.
Right. So he's going to say, okay, well, God's knowledge is dynamic. It's active. It's living. So it grows. It's dynamic because it grows because he learns new things.
Yeah. Versus your God of stasis.
Yeah. You're static.
Your boring old God who doesn't change and can't even think.
Right. Yeah. Forget the fact that God not changing is like the basis that he gives us for trusting in his promises, but whatever. So he's going to say, okay, well, so we have this dynamic omniscience because we believe that God's omniscience can change. And as a classical theist, I'm going to say, well, no, God knows all things in the future. There's no inherent contradiction to the future being knowable, right? It's not like a married bachelor. Future knowable. That's not you have to do way more spade work to show that's any type of contradiction. And so I'm going to look at it and say, okay, well, I mean, God just knows the future. You're redefining omniscience, and you're just saying, well, we affirm omniscience is just dynamic. And so the example I give is like that's like a modalist saying, well, I'm a Trinitarian. I'm just a dynamic Trinitarian, right? Because it's a changing Trinity. Well, then you're just not a Trinitarian. That's not what we mean by it. You're redefining the terms and totally muddying the waters. Because if you think about it, heretics always want to do this because they don't want to be seen as heretics. This is why Jehovah's Witnesses want to say, we're Christians too. Look, we believe in monotheism.
We're the Christians.
Right? Hebrew Israelites.
A lot of them say they're the true Christians too, yeah.
Right? So they want to say, hey, we're one at the table too. We can use the same words as you. Don't you see we use the same words? And they slide in the fact that they are using them in a way that no one has meant them for 2,000 years.
Oh, boy. Okay. Some of this, it's almost like winning by defining things a certain way. It's like where the...
I call it lexical fiat. You're trying to win your debate by defining your position into truth.
Almost like, a hardcore naturalist or something. Well, believing that anyone created anything is not by definition science. Therefore, it can't be in the discussion. Or we know historically miracles don't happen. There's no such thing as a miracle, so it can't be considered part of history. Now let's have the discussion. That kind of thing. I'm not saying they're doing exactly the same thing, but I see a similarity. I'm surprised at how many questions and comments we have already. So I wasn't planning on doing this. I didn't realize you're going to be. People are going to be so interested in one of them. So let me throw some of this up at you. The Heavy Heart Show. I'm learning about this in school. Hyped to hear from y'all on this. I heard it's infected evangelicalism. Comment.
Yeah, I mean, this started back in the 80s and 90s when this became a controversy at ETS, at the Evangelical Theological Society, when Sanders and others were trying to make open theism palatable to evangelicals, and to large extent, they have been successful at that. But
I think real quick, my professor. I'm not going to get on the behind the scenes stuff, but basically they had some meetings, the ETS folks, and tried to make open theism, if you embrace it, a basis for being excluded from the society, and they were not successful.
That's correct.
And Geisler famously had a major problem with that.
Yeah. There are some people who just left ETS because they're like, well, if open theists can be in ETS, like this is just pointless. Why are we even here?
The way my professor related to me was if Geisler essentially stormed, banged his hand on the table and then stormed out of the room.
Pretty close. Yeah. But they're basically like, hey, if open theism can be part of like ETS, just go to SBL. Like if you want to be that liberal and outside of Orthodox Christianity, just go to SBL where all the liberal critical scholars are, the process theologians. Just go there. Stop coming into ETS. You don't have to be there. But again, the impulse of the heretic is we want to be viewed as on the inside. Right. And so they want to be accepted by evangelicalism because they don't want to be viewed as the outside, as the heretics outside, and conservative evangelicals have not appreciated that maneuver.
Next comment. Rick Caldwell, shout out to that brother, does excellent work. Tyler did well. Tyler Vela did well in the dynamic omniscience debate against Warren McGrew. I guess it's a chance for you to comment on that.
I appreciate it. It was an interesting debate. I went in knowing that McGrew would start by talking about dynamic omniscience and then very quickly switch to Calvinism is false.
Right.
And so I tried very hard to keep the burden. He had the burden of the debate. So I tried very hard to keep the burden on, you need to prove that dynamic omniscience is true. I don't need to prove that the debate isn't Calvinism. I don't need to prove that Calvinism is true. And it actually came encircled mostly on, not even on anything like it actually came down to the different view of classical theism versus non-classical theism, and that kind of the influence of process theology, and if we can talk, what is our language about God? Whereas classically, Orthodox Christians have said all of our language about God is analogical.
Right.
Every single thing we say is by using our human language. We're like babies babbling, trying to describe God, but it's all by analogies. It's all by understanding our created, through things that we can understand. And for the open theists, they're going to say, well, no, language about God isn't analogical, right? When it says that God relents, it really, really means that God, has a change. He changes his mind. Right. So there.
Yeah. Well, Eugene is in the audience, and Eugene says, I'm an open theist, and here's what he says in regards to something you were saying earlier. That's how I feel. I feel better thinking God can respond to my prayers and things can change. How would you respond to him in a pastoral manner?
Yeah, I would point out and say, you don't need open theism for that, right? So think about it. The objection that he's trying to say is, okay, well, if God knows all things, why do I have to pray, right? Why do I have to pray for something, for favor in the eyes of someone in an interview to get a job? Why do I have to pray for that? God already knows whether I'm going to get it or not get it. It's fixed. What's the purpose of my prayer, right? So he's going to say, yeah, I really think that my prayer matters and will change things, right? In brackets, will change what God knows, or, well, he didn't know, he'll learn the outcome, right? He has to act to try to achieve it too. Everyone who's a classical, everyone who isn't an open theist is going to say, that's not how prayer works, right? We're going to say prayer, even if God knows the outcome, right? You're praying for something is the mechanism by which God brings it about, right? So to use a kind of, I know this is a silly answer that a lot of Reform folks give, but if God knew that I would be full and nourished and not hungry tonight, he would, and he decreed that to happen, does that mean that I don't have to eat dinner? Well, no, my eating dinner is the means by which God's decree comes about, right? It's the track that the outcome, the means matter to the outcome happening. So the outcome is still entirely contingent upon the means happening. It's just that it's decreed that that's the means and that's the outcome that's going to happen, and God knew that's going to happen. But you still have to pray, right? You still have kind of the storyline level where we don't know the outcome. We still act in wisdom and truth and trying to understand and trying to figure it out and pray. And our prayers matter, right? We're not fatalists.
He says, if the future is set already, then nothing I pray for can change, and nothing I do can change. Whatever God knows what's going to happen, therefore I can't be responsible.
So this is where he's begging the question of incompatibilism, right? Incompatibilism is the view that if something is determined, then it's incompatible with freedom that's necessary for responsibility, right? It's a mouthful, but that's what incompatibilism is. He's begging the question of that, right? As a compatibilist, I'm going to say, well, no, something can be determined, and that's entirely compatible with you being free in a responsible way. Your actions still matter to the outcome. Now, the question is, can what I do change what has been decreed to happen? No. But that doesn't mean that what I do is irrelevant to what happens, right? So they're making that kind of like conceptual shift, right? If God has, again, if whatever God has decreed is going to come about, it's not my job to try to change what God has decreed. It's just that my actions matter to the outcome is still contingent upon what I do. What I do still brings about the outcome. The determination and my actions are compatible with each other. They are both co-causal of the outcome. Right? So at that point I would just say, well, I just don't grant the incompatibilistic assumption. You need to prove that. You can't just assume it.
Well, on a somewhat different note, Kev says, pretty sure I'm a provisionist. He's speaking of himself there. But then he follows up with something in regards to prayer. Prayer is not influencing God to change things. Would you indeed only pray to God if he does the things you pray for? And so it says that. And then says this. Many, if not all, open theists deny penal substitutionary atonement, vocab alone.
That's also true. Most of them deny penal substitutionary atonement. They affirm some type of, Christus Victor, or I forget the one that McGrew affirms. It's a newer one. I can't remember what it's called, but
so there's a lot of things related to that.
Yeah, so I mean, it's again, you have this group of people that effectively affirm a non-classical view. Causes Trinitarian problems. It causes problems with the hypostatic union. They deny penal substitution. They do these, it's just this bad on bad on bad.
From what I can tell, open theists deny PSA because they cannot reconcile God being fully transcendent of linear time.
They deny it for a bunch of different reasons. That's part of it. But they're gonna deny it because they sometimes they think it's unloving. Sometimes they're just gonna think it's not biblical, and they're gonna think, well, PSA, it's unjust because how can one person be punished for something? They're gonna pull that type of how can Jesus be punished for my sins, right? In a penal sense, right? That's actually unjust and unloving. So they're gonna deny it for different ways.
My. So, I mean, I'm trying to... well, let me take at least one more question here. My man Daniel Alexander, how you doing, brother? It's been a minute. Shout out. And he said, a really interesting point made where Tyler said OTs are the most consistent libertarian free will people. In regards to that. And then also, he says you're doing a good job of being fair across the board here and understands the varying views.
I try to be, I don't pull punches. I'm going to be as brutally honest as I can, but I try to be as accurate to views as I can.
And then question, why is it heresy to believe in different attributes of God?
Yeah. So, okay. So and this is where it depends on what you mean by heresy, right? So there's heresy, there's heterodoxy, there's what some people call, you mentioned damnable heresy. The term can sometimes be helpful, sometimes not helpful, because if you hear heretic and you automatically think the person means that they're unsaved, right? That can be a problem. The way that I use heresy is that it is a view that has been expressly condemned by the Universal Orthodox Church, whether you're Catholic, Arminian, Protestant, Reformed, Orthodox. Like everybody has said, that's not it. Nope, that's too far out. That's out of bounds. That's not Christian theology. That's heresy. It's something that is just denied universally by the Orthodox Church. And to that, open theism is that in spades, right? It denies every single, all the historically Orthodox attributes of God. It denies, penal substitutionary atonement. It denies, it just has so many denials and so many errors in it that I don't see how anyone can hold it and consider themselves Orthodox.
Where does damnable heresy versus non-damnable distinction come from?
It doesn't. It's somewhat arbitrary, and this is where we're Protestants. We're not Catholics. We don't have an authoritative tradition, but that doesn't mean that we can't have a reasonable warrant for our certain views, right? So we don't have to have Cartesian certainty. But here, I would say, okay, well, there's heresies that someone can believe, but it doesn't necessarily mean that someone's not saved. There are other heresies that if you affirm certain views, you're not Christian any sense of the term. Someone who's going to say, well, Jesus isn't God, right? It's not just that they get, because you can almost forgive someone or understand how someone. I mean, when you get into Orthodox Christology, it gets complicated. How many wills are there? How are the minds of God? How do the natures relate to each other? Right? In kind of working out those secondary implications, you can get into heretical grounds, but everyone's trying to say, okay, Jesus is God and Jesus is human. They're just trying to work out how that happens, and sometimes they'll veer into heresy. But the person who says, well, Jesus isn't God, right? He's the Archangel Michael, or he's created, or he's just a good guy and a prophet. He's adopted, like the Unitarians, for example. That's damnable heresy in the sense that you're not even trying to be a Christian at that, like in the Orthodox sense. You're just so far outside that you're not even considered a brother at that point.
Yeah, I think with damnable heresy, we're recognizing the seriousness of the error to the point of denial of the gospel. Whereas if someone says heresy is a distinction to damnable heresy, that may mean this is a serious error, but doesn't have to necessarily perhaps mean an out and outright of the fundamentals in a way that would damn one's soul. Make them be in the category of anathema. What do you think about? This is my question. The term heterodox. That's kind of like maybe it's not as bad as damnable heresy, but maybe it's somewhere on the spectrum.
Yeah. So heterodox, I take it, and to be fair, I hold a couple of heterodox views.
Oh yeah.
Heterodox, I take it to be views that are outside of the main categories of views, but they're on non-essential doctrines.
Right.
Right. So I hold a heterodox view about creation. Right. So the Orthodox views historically have been either some version of young Earth creationism or some version of old Earth creationism. Those have just been the Orthodox views throughout the history. I hold a view that says, well, neither of those. That's just not the point of Genesis, right? It's not about an essential of the faith that is a demarcation of Christian or non-Christian, but the view that I hold is also wildly underrepresented in Christian theology and is largely not held to until later in Christian theology. I think it's true, but it's not about an essential doctrine. It's not about the nature of God, the person of Jesus, or the work of Jesus. Those three seem to be the essentials that define what it means to be a Christian or not a Christian.
So theistic evolution?
So theistic evolution, I would think is a heterodox view, right? Because
no, what I'm saying is that your view, though.
Oh no, so I don't. My view is that Genesis 1 and creation isn't telling us about material. It's not trying to tell us.
Yeah, but Genesis isn't the only place where you would go to learn about creation.
Yeah, I think it's the only one that has a chance of being about material creation.
So you think no place in the Bible talks about that at all?
Correct.
But Genesis 1, if any place, is the only place that has a shot.
That's going to be it. But
okay.
but I don't.
Do you
but
affirm creatio ex nihilo?
Yep.
Well, it seems like you might be like.
You got to go. I have a whole collection on this. I have like 40 hours of content on this.
40 hours of content.
Yeah. So effectively argue that Genesis 1 is actually just a theological temple text used to satirize and polemicize the surrounding nations of Israel.
No, so I've seen that stuff. But my view is generally you can affirm the polemics of Genesis and still affirm it's teaching you something about material creation. But you're saying probably not. But I got you. Because I don't think affirming some of that polemical stuff, I mean, to me, that stuff's fire. Not all of it. I think sometimes people go too far, as if the main point of Genesis, maybe like where you're at, is to do that. But it's interesting. Okay, we don't want to get it too far off. Dr. Bob, shout out to him. He's our EO specialist. He says, Dynamic Omniscience sounds like a great name for a garage band. Yeah, and some other great comments. We got some great comments up in here today. Shout out to everybody in the live chat, especially the mods. You guys know I love you. And you guys do great work all the time, and I just want to make sure you know that I appreciate you. Now, let me circle back here, because help me understand as someone who, I'm not a Calvinist who has a knee-jerk reaction to anyone that is not a Calvinist. So I like lots of people and can get along with them and don't really want to go after. With that being said, I'm still trying to understand what exactly like Leighton Flowers is doing and what exactly is happening there. I'm not trying to do a guilt by association. I'm not trying to say I'm none of that. I'm genuinely trying to understand, what are you saying is going on there exactly with Open, because he knows they're Open Theists, right?
Yeah. So
what's happening?
My hot take, my quick take, and on that is there's a couple things that are happening, I think. In the world of non-Calvinism, there is kind of this subspecies that a lot of us just call anti-Calvinists.
So I do agree that exists, and probably some of my friends fall into those brackets, and some people get really carried away with it. So far I agree, and I also think, there's Calvinists who are just like wildly anti anything non-Calvinist, and that everyone's a heretic and they can't be friends, and they just want to make fun of them. They take it personal. Okay, so I'm following you so far.
Yep. So for that group, anything's on the table. It's like the anti-theists, like the YouTube atheists. It doesn't matter how bad an argument is. It doesn't matter how misrepresentative it is. It doesn't matter who says it, or how bad the meme is. As long as it makes fun of religion, they're going to go with it.
All right. Okay.
Anti-Calvinism kind of has the same thing.
Yeah.
As long as someone is willing to give an argument or a point or something that skewers Calvinism, it's going to get a platform. It's going to get a hearing. It doesn't matter how exegetically poor it is. It doesn't matter how philosophically naive it is. It doesn't matter how theologically inconsistent it is. It doesn't matter how contradictory it is to your own other positions that you hold, right? Because Leighton Flowers, he's flat out said he's not an open theist, right? He does not affirm open theism. He thinks that it's false. He won't go so far as to say it's heresy, which I think is weird, but maybe he's just trying. He's a really gentlemanly Southern type of guy. So maybe that's just that. Although he has no problem skewering Calvinists, whatever. So for
that's
him,
kind of his thing. So yeah, I get it.
So he will have people on so far as they help advance the anti-Calvinist platform.
So he'll interview. So I don't follow well enough to know. Are you saying, for example, he'll interview an open theist about things that are anti-Calvinist? Are these things that a good old Arminian or Wesleyan could affirm? The things that the open theist is saying in this instance?
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. I've seen when Warren McGrew was on his show, he said a couple things, and Leighton maybe he was too polite and he just nodded, or he didn't connect the dots, which is possible also, because some of these things are, unless you're really digging into the systematic theologies and seeing where the inconsistencies are. But McGrew said a couple things in there that, like, anybody who's an Orthodox Christian, when it comes to the nature of God or the hypostatic union, should have been like, whoa. No.
Well, maybe he's not trying to argue with his guest or something like that,
right. So for the platform, but they get an airtime because they're helping stick it to the Calvinists.
Okay, so yeah, I'm trying. I understand. So it's like those folks are getting airtime with their anti-Calvinist stuff, but it's not necessarily about open theism, but they slip it in sometimes.
Yeah. So, for example, I have a couple of friends who I've had on the show, on my show, who are they're very good at explicating Reformed theology and stuff like that, but they're theonomists, right? I think theonomy is. Sorry for anyone in the audience. I think theonomy is nonsense. I think it's one of the worst positions that has come out of Reformed theology. But I'm not gonna debate that point with them on this show when we're talking about something else. So I get it, right? Flowers is they're talking about this one thing and this one problem with determinism and compatibilism and all that kind of stuff. He's not going to necessarily be like, okay, like I'm going to call you on this open theism. The problem though is that theonomy isn't rank heresy. I think that's a heterodox position. Maybe it depends. Constantinianism did kind of reign in Christendom for 1,000 years, and theonomy gets close to that. But so at one level,
you're saying the issue is
it's heresy, but maybe not, because it's not the point of the episode. But sometimes they say things that you probably should. It gets complicated because open theism is so far outside that maybe you should, fence your podcast a little bit more.
Yeah, so it's kind of a screening issue, and there's also, as some people say on the internet, or just on the street, whatever. There's levels to this, and I think we would think theonomy is not good, but open theism is more not good.
Yeah, right. But again, I want to be charitable late and be like, look, it's his show. Like, we've talked about our friend, Cameron Bertuzzi on Capturing Christianity, and he will have people on that are like, how far do you do it? Like I've had atheists on my show. He's had atheists. He's had people that bring on these like really crazy, like super unbiblical views to discuss them because they're interesting discussions.
Right.
Or they're profitable discussions.
Yeah, I had Doug Powell on, and I said, I don't believe in the Shroud of Turin, but I respect you, and you always do great presentations. I'll let you make your case, and I'm not necessarily going to go after you on this show. I'm just going to ask you questions, and I'll let you present it. Okay, I understand that spirit of, okay. But what if every week I had a different Shroud of Turin proponent on, right? You'd be like, well, what's going on? And I was always, that's interesting.
Yeah. Or and again, I want to be charitable to late. I don't think him having them on is tacitly, approving of open theism or anything like that. Like hopefully this doesn't get back to him and be like, Tyler's saying you affirm open theism or you think open theism is great. Nothing like that. But it does get to a point where it's like, okay, but like you keep having him on and you keep advertising for the Provisionist Perspective YouTube channel, which one of their hosts is just an ardent open theist. Like there's a certain point where you want to be like, okay, like.
Wait, there's a thing called the Provisionist Podcast channel, and one of the hosts is an open theist?
Yeah, it's called the Provisionist Perspective, and Drew from there, I always forget his last name. Drew is an open theist. He affirms.
Man, it seems like they would want to. I guess maybe in their mind the spectrum is close. Maybe they feel closer to them, not that they would affirm it, than they do some crazy Calvinist maybe in their mind. But I feel like if I was a Provisionist or any of the other versions, I feel like I would want to kind of stay away. Like, don't put me in with that. That's why I'd feel.
Yeah, I get. There's a certain reason. Like I don't really ever have hyper Calvinists on, because the way that I look at it,
do they exist? Have you met some?
Yeah, I met some, but I always look at them and like they're kind of like the crazy ant. You just want to keep locked in the Reformed attic, and let's not let's not give them airtime because they're already hurting our reputation. Let's not do it more. So there's a certain sense where it's like all the libertarians should be like, yeah, let's like stop advancing open theism.
Although I gotta say, if we can meet a hyper Calvinist, I would like to talk to one just to understand them better. Because I feel like I've met one in my life, and then he actually became Eastern Orthodox later on. So he went from hyper Calvinism to Eastern Orthodox. So I don't really even know any hyper Calvinists. I hear about them every now and then, but I'm like, who are the hyper Calvinists? I'd like to hear what they have to say. I don't know.
I know a few. It's weird.
Okay, so that's fascinating. So Leighton, we've talked. I was just trying to understand what's going on. I'm not trying to. You can see we're not saying that's you, anything like that. I'm just trying to understand all this. That's all. So and help the audience understand. So I do think the internet can make people really uncharitable. So Sonny Hernandez, yeah, that's an example. Kev says, "My goodness, now I remember that guy." You're right, Kev. Kel, sorry. I don't know if I'd want to have him on. Maybe give me a hyper Calvinist besides. I don't know, man. I don't know. That's because I know who you're talking about. Okay, so I'm just thinking about a lot of this. Okay, interesting. Because I don't know. I feel like the internet can easily make us uncharitable. We already have a temptation to be uncharitable, and so I try to be charitable, and then you can make the mistake of anyways. So I appreciate this. Okay, let's wind this down. What's the current? Where has open theism went? Where is it now? Where do you think it's going? Help us understand, Tyler, because you're kind of in the trenches on this. And wind this down.
Yeah. So for anyone who wants to know, like, how to engage with like the biblical, verses that they would use. I mean, we cover a bunch of them in the debates that I had with Will Duffy and with Warren McGrew. You can go there and some of those other issues.
So watch the debates with Warren McGrew and Will Duffy, you're saying?
Yeah, watch those,
okay.
And that's where you kind of get the hashing out of that type of thing. The thing that people need to realize is that in dealing with kind of your average dynamic omniscience, open theists online, your Warren McGrews, Will Duffys, Chris Fishers, they're going to be different than your academic ones, right? So if you want to know what's happening philosophically with open theism, go read Alan Rhoda, go read John Sanders, go read all that kind of stuff. There's major problems with it. Actually, there was a pretty big book that was the philosophical arguments against open theism. I can't remember the exact title, but it's something along those lines, like an orange cover. There are a lot of these books that come out and argue against the academic side. The side that most people in your audience are going to come across are the Warren McGrews, the Will Duffys, the Chris Fishers, and it's just getting like Salvador Dali land. It's just getting so weird. Like if you listen to Chris Fisher, because he takes this like super hyper literal hermeneutic, he literally views God as a humanoid, like up there on a platform, looking down at us. Like it's hard to understand how his view isn't Zeus. Like it literally is a humanoid up there on a platform looking down. And the reason why he'll look at verses like in
maybe it isn't Zeus because this guy appears to be celibate. He's celibate,
and he's good. Yeah, he's not sleeping with women coming through the window. But it's because it says, God, like in Genesis 18, God had to come down to the cities on the plain to find out if the reports were bad. And Chris Fisher's going to be like, oh well, he had to come down, right? Some of the open theists, they're going to try to wiggle, they're going to get around that other ways. But Chris Fisher's just going to lean into it and be like, no, it says that he had to come down to find out. So he had to come down to find out. He geographically had to come from his platform up there to down at the cities of the plain to find out about the reports.
Okay. Yeah, he seems like an interesting character. When he reviewed my stuff, he was just so like dismissive and disrespectful. But it was like funny. He was just kind of like, yeah, this guy, he doesn't know how. Let's run. Just like,
yeah.
I was like,
yeah,
what am I watching? He was a character, I didn't take it personal. I was like, this guy's a real character,
He thinks God has like countless bodies. So like in the Bible when it
like
says
in Iron Man 3.
Yeah. So he just jumps around. So like when it says
Ultron,
like God is another
Ultron,
hen,
maybe that's a better example. Sorry, Ultron is like, which one's really Ultron? Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
So when it says like God is a mother hen, it's because mother, like henness is a goodness. It's a good attribute of God. So God actually has
protects,
a hen,
secures,
right. So it just gets so bizarre when you start talking to, he's kind of the extreme bizarre. It's weird, and he's weird to talk to. Again, he's very dismissive, and he also, if you watch his debate, him and Will Duffy had like a 2-on-2 debate with these two other people, and he would be like, this snide little comment under his breath, making all kinds of equivocation and assumptions, and then be like, and that's my piece. Will, what do you got? Like almost like I'm going to say this like super question begging thing, and then move on where there's no response, and it's just like
he kind of reminds me of like your stereotypical internet atheist. Like
kind of.
the lower side of atheist, like not my atheist friends, not the respectful thought, like that kind of the lower level. Those guys are like, that's stupid Christians. I'm done. It's dumb. I'm done. Just kind of that thing. Okay. Wow. Okay. My goodness. Jeremiah 15:16. Any good books dealing with open theism? I know that Beyond the Bounds. Piper. And these are older things. I thought Geisler had one. I know John Frame had one. And then who's the Wayne House, I think, had one. What else is out there maybe more modern than those?
Bruce Ware has one called God's Lesser Glory.
He has two. I think God's Greater Glory as well might be a good companion piece.
That's the other side. God's Lesser Glory is his treatment specifically of open theism. John Frame has one. I think it's called No Other God.
Yep, that's it.
William Lane Craig has one.
Is that helpful? Is that helpful? The Craig one?
Yeah, well, I mean, he has one where his book on the compatibility of divine foreknowledge with human responsibility or human freedom is helpful in overcoming open theism. It's not a view. His conclusions aren't ones that I would address, but he addresses open theism in them. There's a couple of the multi-view ones that deal with it. Paul Helm has a book on the providence of God that deals with it. There is one, I can't think of it. It came out pretty recently. It's Beyond the Bounds is a good one that's helpful, but there's one, it's orange.
Was that the philosophical arguments against open theism one?
Yeah, it's philosophical arguments against open theism or philosophical objections against open theism, something like that. It's an orange cover with white writing. I'm totally blanking on it right now.
That's right.
There's lots of articles that you can look for on it. There's lots of material arguing against open theism. It really is a super minority view, super fringe view. So
they seem to be able to make a lot of noise, though.
Yeah, they're just vocal.
But I wonder if, gosh, I don't want to say this because I'm really trying to. I feel like they would have less ability to make noise if maybe some of our anti-Calvinist, Arminian Wesleyan, Provisionist, et cetera, friends did not hobnob with them.
Yeah, so, well, that's part of it. But the other part of it is they're gaining more ground because the anti-Calvinists are pushing so hard against determinism and compatibilism that they're basically making it so that the two options are hard determinism in their thinking. These are the two options.
Right.
Hard determinism that we're robots.
Okay.
Or the super libertarian freedom where you have to have this strong metaphysical possibility to do other things. Not in the contingent sense, not in the conditional sense. It's like this very, very hard view. And once you start getting into the literature, the only people who really affirm that type of view are open theists, right? Because the compatibilist is going to present all these arguments and grounding objections that are going to show, okay, but like if God knows what you're going to do, right? So I make this argument. If God knows what you're going to do tomorrow, he has knowledge, not just warranted belief. He has knowledge of what you're going to do tomorrow. He knows it. Therefore it is a true. God has warrant, and it's true, right? Because that's what knowledge is.
Mm-hmm.
And God is infallible. God cannot be wrong. He has perfect knowledge. It is not possible for God to be wrong. Then can you act other than what God knows? If you say yes, then what you've said is a contradiction. Because me being able to choose other than that tomorrow is synthetically identical. In philosophy, there's this synthetical identity with if it's possible for me to do not X, but God believes I'm going to do X, that means it's just identically the same thing as saying it's possible that God's knowledge be wrong. Those just are identical. If one has a certain truth value to it, the other one is the logical contrapositive. If it's possible for me to do not X tomorrow, but God believes I'm going to do X, then it's possible that God's knowledge be wrong. Those two things are just identical, right? So you've just built in this grounding objection. If you say no, that it's not possible, then you have to come up with some other type of freedom, some other type of, you could be a libertarian, but it's some type of conditional, some type of soft leeway. You're not going to be this hard, extreme libertarian incompatibilist, right? So when you've set up this dichotomy between these two things,
right,
you've almost like given this fertile soil to the open theist. Right. And so that's just the ground that you're going to develop. And so it shouldn't be surprising that the outcome of that kind of attack against Calvinism and compatibilism determinism just a byproduct of it is going to be an increase in
So
open
like
theism.
extreme rabid anti-Calvinism is priming the pump for open
Yeah.
theism.
Yeah, that's just going to be the byproduct of it.
Well, I appreciate that, man. One more time, tell people where to find you. Thanks for catching us up on what's going on with open theism today, Tyler. People want to see some of your other series and your podcast and YouTube and works that are written. Where do they go?
You can go to the freedthinkerpodcast.blogspot.com. You can check out the Freed Thinker on YouTube or come to the Freed Thinker group page on Facebook. You can have a conversation with there if you want to have ask me about any of the sources or anything. I can give them to you there as well.
No doubt. Yeah, shout out to MJ. Shout out to Timothy. Got some great people in the live chat. Shout out to all y'all. Thank you very much, Tyler, and thanks for joining. I appreciate your time and all your work in this area. Keep it up, my brother, and have fun sitting in traffic.
Thanks. Appreciate you having me on.
All right, no doubt.